In the harsh fjords of 9th century Norrland, where strength meant survival and weakness invited death, Freyja Sigurdsdottir was cast out by her own clan for a crime she didn't commit. Desperate and alone, she accepted a marriage proposal from a renowned Viking warrior across the sea. What awaited her wasn't the respected shield maiden's position she'd been promised, but a settlement divided, a betrothed missing on a raid, and a hostile clan convinced a woman with a crippled arm could never be worthy of their warriors. Shunned as an outsider and mocked for her perceived weakness, Freyja's fate seemed sealed, until Halfdan, the king's estranged son, returned from exile with secrets of his own and saw what others had failed to see. The longship crested another wave, sending icy spray across the deck. Freyja Sigurdsdottir pulled her fur cloak tighter, with her good arm, her right hand clutching the carved wooden pendant that had become her talisman through the grueling 2-week voyage. The token was her only physical connection to Ragnar Haraldson, the warrior who had offered her a new beginning through his letters, marriage, respect, and most importantly, a place where her past would not follow her. First time sailing the northern waters? The old shipmaster squinted at her from beneath bushy gray eyebrows, his weathered face creasing into something between a smile and a grimace. Is it so obvious? Freyja tried to smile despite the churning in her stomach. The voyage from her homeland in the eastern fjords had been punishing, especially for someone accustomed to solid ground. Most shield maidens have their sea legs by your age. His gaze dropped momentarily to her right arm, which hung slightly awkward at her side. Though I suppose you've had other battles to fight. Freyja straightened, her chin lifting as it always did when someone noticed her imperfect arm. The injury had happened when she was 12, a bad fall that had broken her arm in 2 places. It had healed poorly, leaving her with limited strength and mobility in that limb. Not useless, but not what was expected of a woman born to a warrior clan. I've never claimed to be a shield maiden, she replied evenly. Ragnar knows of my arm. He values other strengths. The shipmaster nodded slowly. Ragnar Haraldson is a good man, respected warrior. The settlement at Ravnfjord will welcome you. There was something in his tone that suggested uncertainty, but Freyja was too focused on the approaching shoreline to press him further. The truth was, she had shared everything with Ragnar in their correspondence, her injury, her exile from her clan after being falsely accused of stealing sacred ritual items, her skills as a healer and weaver. His letters in return had been thoughtful, respectful, and increasingly warm over the 6 months they had exchanged messages through traveling merchants. There is honor in healing hands and a keen mind, he had written. My settlement needs both. I need both. After years of being seen as broken and then branded a thief, his words had been a balm to Freyja's wounded spirit. When he had proposed marriage in his last letter, she had accepted without hesitation, packing her few belongings and using the last of her silver to secure passage on the next ship heading west to Ragnar's settlement. As the longship approached the natural harbor of Ravnfjord, Freyja could see the settlement spread out along the protected shoreline, wooden buildings with turf roofs, smoking hearth fires sending gray wisps into the chill air, small fishing boats pulled up on the pebbly beach. It was smaller than her home settlement had been, but well established, with a great hall visible on a rise overlooking the water. Ravnfjord, the shipmaster announced, home to Jarl Harald's clan for 3 generations now. Freyja's heart quickened. Jarl Harald is Ragnar's father? The shipmaster gave her an odd look. Was. The old Jarl died last winter. His eldest, Bjorn, leads now. This was unexpected. Ragnar had mentioned his father was aging, but had said nothing of his death, or that his brother now led the clan. Perhaps the news had come after his last letter had been sent. She would have many questions for her betrothed once they were reunited. 2. Ship glided into the harbor, and as they drew closer to the docks, Freyja could see a small gathering of people waiting. Her eyes scanned the crowd for a man who might be Ragnar, though she realized she had no true idea of his appearance beyond his descriptions of being tall with a beard streaked with early gray despite his 30 winters. The shipmaster directed the crew to secure the vessel to the dock, and finally, they were still. After weeks of constant motion, the solid wood beneath her feet felt strange. Freyja gathered her small trunk of possessions and prepared to disembark, her stomach fluttering with anticipation and nerves. A broad-shouldered man with a thick red beard stepped forward as she descended to the dock. "You must be Freyja," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I am Thorstein, Ragnar's friend and shield brother." Freyja nodded, suddenly uncertain. "Where is Ragnar? I expected him to meet me." A shadow crossed Thorstein's face. "There is much to tell you. Come, we'll speak at the hall." As they walked through the settlement, Freyja felt eyes upon her, curious, evaluating, and some openly hostile. Women paused in their work to watch her pass, whispering behind their hands. Children stopped their play to stare at the newcomer. She was accustomed to stares, had endured them her entire life because of her arm, but this felt different, more intense. The great hall sat atop a gentle slope, offering views of both the harbor and the surrounding forest. Inside, a fire burned, in the central hearth, filling the space with warmth and the scent of wood smoke. Several men and women sat at tables, deep in discussion, but fell silent as Freyja entered with Thorstein. A man rose from the high seat at the far end, tall and broad with a golden arm ring that marked him as the Jarl. His beard was dark and full, his eyes sharp as they assessed her. "So this is the woman my brother chose," he said, making no effort to approach or welcome her. "I am Bjorn Haraldson, Jarl of Ravenfjord." Freyja inclined her head respectfully. "I am honored to meet you, Jarl Bjorn. I am Freyja Sigurdsdottir of the Eastern Fjords." "Yes, we've heard of you." The way he said it made her blood run cold. "The healer with the broken arm. Ragnar wrote often of you." A woman stepped forward from beside the Jarl, beautiful, with golden hair braided elaborately, and adorned with silver beads. Her eyes were the color of a frozen lake as they regarded Freyja with clear disdain. "This is the one?" she asked Bjorn, as if Freyja were not present. "This is who Ragnar would bring into our family?" "She cannot even lift a shield." Freyja felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her voice steady. "I have other skills that benefit a settlement. Ragnar valued those." The woman laughed, a sound without warmth. "My brother was always soft-hearted, too willing to see worth where there was none." "Was?" Freyja's heart sank at the woman's use of past tense. She turned to Thorstein, whose face had grown grave. "Please, tell me what has happened to Ragnar." Thorstein exchanged a glance with Bjorn, who nodded slightly. 3 weeks ago, Ragnar led a small raid to the southern islands, Thorstein explained. "They were due back 10 days ago. There has been no word, no sign of their ship." "A storm struck the night they would have been returning," added an older woman who had remained silent until now. She wore the keys of a respected householder at her belt, and her face, though lined with age, held a quiet dignity. Many believe they were lost at sea. "They're dead," Bjorn stated flatly. "No ship could have survived those waters that night." Freyja felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her. She had crossed an ocean for a man she would never meet, a future that had vanished like morning mist. I don't understand. If you believed him dead, why allow me to come?" "The message to halt your journey was sent," Bjorn said, "but clearly it did not reach you in time." The golden-haired woman stepped closer. "I am Sigrid, daughter of Jarl Harald, sister to Bjorn and Ragnar. You have my sympathies for your wasted journey, but there is nothing for you here now. We will provide you passage on the next ship returning eastward." Freyja's mind raced. Return where? To her home settlement where she had been branded a thief? To wander as an outcast, alone and vulnerable? She had spent every silver piece she possessed to reach Ravenfjord, had burned every bridge behind her. "I have nowhere to return to," she admitted, hating the vulnerability in her voice. An uncomfortable silence fell over the hall. Finally, the older woman with the household keys spoke again. "I am Astrid, widow of Jarl Harald," she said. "This girl has traveled far at Ragnar's invitation. We cannot simply cast her out when she has nowhere to go. It would bring dishonor to our sons, memory into our hall." Bjorn's expression darkened. "What would you have us do, mother? Honor a betrothal to a dead man? She cannot even perform a shield maiden's duties with that arm. What use is she to our clan?" "Ragnar said she was skilled in healing," Torstein interjected. "Our healer, Geira, grows old and has no apprentice. Perhaps we need warriors and strong mothers to bear them, not crippled herb gatherers," Sigrid cut in sharply. "Look at her. She can barely carry her own trunk, let alone defend our settlement or bear healthy children." Freyja had endured many insults in her life, but few so cutting or delivered with such casual cruelty. Still, she refused to show weakness before these strangers. "I may not wield a sword," she said, meeting Sigrid's cold gaze. "But I have never let my arm prevent me from working or learning. I am a skilled healer, trained by my grandmother who was known throughout the eastern settlements. I can prepare medicines, set bones, stitch wounds, and ease difficult childbirths. I am also accomplished in weaving and rune lore." Astrid nodded, thoughtfully. "These are valuable skills, regardless of her arm." Bjorn waved dismissively. "Fine. She may stay until the spring trading ships arrive. She can assist old Geira if the woman will have her. But do not expect to be treated as Ragnar's widow or as part of this family. You are here on sufferance, nothing more. Consider yourself fortunate," Sigrid added, with a thin smile. "Most settlements would not waste resources on someone like you." With that final barb, the audience was clearly at an end. Torstein touched Freyja's elbow gently, guiding her away from the high table. "Come," he said quietly. "I'll show you to Geira's hut. She can at least provide you shelter for now." As they left the great hall, Freyja fought to maintain her composure. Everything had gone wrong. Ragnar missing and presumed dead, his family hostile except for his mother's minimal courtesy, and she herself stranded in a strange settlement where she was already viewed as worthless because of her arm. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of snow. Winter was coming to Ravenfjord, and Freyja had never felt more alone. "I'm sorry," Torstein said as they walked down the path toward the cluster of smaller dwellings. "Ragnar spoke highly of you. He believed you would bring new strength to our settlement, though not the kind his siblings value." "You think he's truly dead?" Freyja asked, needing to hear the truth from someone who seemed to lack the cruelty of Ragnar's siblings. Torstein's face grew solemn. "The storm that night was the worst I've seen in many years. Their ship was small, the seas merciless. I want to believe he lives, but—" His voice trailed off, and Freyja understood. Hope was a luxury neither of them could afford. They approached. A small hut set slightly apart from the others, smoke rising from its chimney hole. Before Torstein could announce their presence, the door swung open to reveal an elderly woman with a deeply lined face and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "So this is the girl from across the sea," she said, her voice stronger than her frail appearance. "Suggested?" "Ragnar's chosen. Geira, this is Freyja Sigurdsdottir," Torstein introduced her. "Jarl Bjorn has suggested she might assist you with your healing work while she stays in Ravenfjord." The old woman's eyes narrowed as she studied Freyja, lingering on her right arm for only a moment before moving to her face, seemingly looking deeper. "Can you identify lungwort from comfrey? Do you know the difference between healing and poisonous? Mushrooms? Can you set a bone and stitch a wound without flinching?" "Yes to all," Freyja answered simply. "My grandmother was a healer before me. I began learning at her knee when I was 5 winters old. Gira nodded once, decisive. Then you may be of use, regardless of what Sigrid thinks of your arm. She stepped back from her doorway. Come in, girl. You look half frozen and entirely too thin. Torstein, tell Astrid I'll take charge of the girl for now. Torstein looked relieved. You have my thanks, Gira. And yours as well, I imagine? He added to Freyja with a small smile. Gira is formidable, but fair. You could have found yourself in far worse company. As Torstein departed, Freyja entered the healer's hut, immediately, enveloped by warmth and the comforting sense of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Whatever waited for her in Ravnfjord, at least she had found one small sanctuary for the night. What she couldn't know was that far to the north, along the wild coastline where few dared to sail, another ship was fighting its way home through treacherous waters. And on that ship, a man with eyes the color of stormy seas was watching the horizon, unaware that the woman he had invited into his life had already been dismissed as unworthy by those he had once called family. Dawn arrived, with a bitter chill that crept through the cracks of Gera's hut, but Freyja had been awake for hours. Sleep had proven elusive, her mind churning with the harsh reality of her situation. The old healer had given her a pile of furs near the hearth and a bowl of hearty stew before retiring to her own sleeping platform, leaving Freyja alone with her thoughts and the quiet crackling of the dying fire. Now, as pale light filtered through the smoke hole in the roof, Freyja rose quietly, careful not to disturb the still sleeping Gera. She stoked the fire, adding dried peat and small sticks as she had seen her hostess do the night before, and hung the iron kettle over the flames to heat water for morning tea. The hut was small but meticulously organized. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, their earthy scents mingling in the air. Wooden shelves lined the walls, holding jars of ointments, honey, and preserved plants. In one corner stood a work table with mortar and pestle, cutting knives, and various implements Freyja recognized from her grandmother's healing practice. It was familiar enough to ease some of her anxiety, yet different enough to remind her how far she was from home. But what was home now? Not the settlement where she'd been branded a thief and cast out. Not the ship that had carried her across the sea. And certainly not this village where she was tolerated only on sufferance. Gyra stirred, her eyes opening to find Freyja already at work. You rise early, she observed, pushing herself up on bony elbows. I thought to make myself useful, Freyja replied, pouring hot water over dried herbs in 2 wooden cups. I've prepared birch bark tea. My grandmother swore by it for easing the aches of old bones on cold mornings. The old woman's eyes narrowed slightly, but she accepted the cup with a nod. Your grandmother taught you well. I feel the winters more with each passing year. She sipped the tea, her expression softening slightly. You've added meadowsweet. For the bitterness, Freyja confirmed, and for the heart. Gira studied her over the rim of her cup. Tell me about your arm. Not what others say of it, but the truth of it. What can you do, and what troubles you? It was a healer's question, direct and without judgment. For the first time since arriving in Ravnfjord, Freyja felt herself relax slightly. It was broken when I was 12, she explained. I fell from a cliff while gathering gull eggs. The bone broke through the skin here. She traced a finger along the scar on her forearm. And again at the elbow. The village healer said it, but it healed poorly. I have perhaps 2/3 the strength of my left, and it pains me when the weather turns, or if I work it too hard. But I've learned to compensate. I can still mix medicines, stitch wounds, deliver, babes tend the ill. And outside the healing arts, what can you do there? Freyja considered this. I weave well, though slower than most. I can cook, clean, tend a garden. I read and write the runes, which few in my former settlement could do. I cannot wield a shield effectively, but I am accurate with a small knife at throwing distance. And I can use a staff for defense if needed. Gera nodded slowly. Yet Bjorn and Sigrid see only what you cannot do. As did my former clan, Freyja admitted. It is often easier to see weakness than strength, especially when the strength is not of the kind most valued. Gera set down her cup. Help me up, girl. We have work to do before the village awakens with its endless demands. I'll show you my stores and methods. If you're to assist me, you should know how I organize my medicines. The morning passed, in a blur of activity as Gera tested Freyja's knowledge of herbs and healing techniques. The old woman was demanding but fair, nodding with approval when Freyja correctly identified plants or described treatments, and correcting her sharply when she erred. By midday, they had established a rhythm of sorts, with Freyja grinding herbs and preparing tinctures while Gera sorted through her winter stores, setting aside what needed replenishing. Before the snows come, Gera explained, we must gather pine resin for wound salves, more birch bark for pain and fever, and cranberries for winter ailments. The forest still offers bounty if one knows where to look. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Thorstein entered, bringing with him a gust of cold air and the scent of salt and fish from the harbor. Jarl Bjorn requests your presence at the Great Hall, Gera, he announced. Sigrid's youngest has the coughing sickness again. Gera sighed, heavily. That child needs more than my medicines. She needs a mother who doesn't coddle her like a fragile blossom. But she was already reaching for her walking stick and medicine bag. Freyja will accompany me. She should begin to know the families she'll be treating. Thorstein's eyes flicked to Freyja, concern evident. Sigrid was quite clear in her opinions yesterday. Perhaps it would be better if I did not ask for your counsel, Thorstein Eriksson. Gera cut him off. The girl is my apprentice now, by the Jarl's own decree. She goes where I go. Her tone brooked no argument. Freyja gathered her cloak, heart pounding at the prospect of facing Sigrid again, so soon, but determined not to show fear. As they made their way to the Great Hall, villagers stopped to stare, some nodding respectfully to Gera, while eyeing Freyja with undisguised curiosity or suspicion. A young woman carrying a basket of wool stepped deliberately into their path. Is it true? She demanded, looking Freyja up and down. You're the cripple Ragnar chose to bring here? The one who can't even lift a shield? Before Freyja could respond, Gera thumped her walking stick on the frozen ground. Mind your tongue, Dagny Osvaldsdottir. This is Freyja, my new apprentice and a trained healer. Unless you wish to treat your father's festering wound yourself, you'd do well to show respect. The young woman flushed, but stood her ground. My brother sailed with Ragnar. He hasn't returned either. We don't need outsiders taking our food stores when winter comes. Your brother knew the risks of raiding, Gera replied coldly. As does every warrior who steps onto a longship. Now stand aside. Reluctantly, the woman moved, but her hostile gaze followed them as they continued to the Great Hall. Freyja kept her head high, though each whisper and stare felt like a physical blow. Ignore them, Gera murmured. Fear makes people cruel, and winter approaches with uncertain food stores. They seek someone to blame for their anxieties. And I am a convenient target, Freyja finished. It was the same in my home village after the harvest failed last year. Suddenly, my arm made me an ill omen rather than merely inconvenient. People fear what they don't understand, Gera agreed. And they understand least of all how the gods mark some of us differently for their own purposes. At the Great Hall, they found Sigrid seated near the fire, holding a small girl of perhaps 4 winters who coughed wretchedly into her mother's shoulder. Bjorn stood nearby, his expression a mixture of concern and impatience. Finally, Sigrid said as they approached, Ingrid has been coughing since before dawn. Gera handed her walking stick to Freyja and lowered herself carefully to examine the child. Breath sounds? Wheezing when she exhales, Sigrid replied. No fever, but she says her chest hurts. The old healer nodded. The same as the last time. And the time before that, I told you she needs more fresh air and less coddling by the hearth. The smoke irritates her lungs. It's too cold for her outside, Sigrid protested. She's delicate. She's a Norse child, Gera retorted. Cold air won't kill her, but treating her like hothouse bloom might. She needs to strengthen her lungs, not hide from every breeze. Sigrid's eyes flashed with anger, then settled on Freyja. Why is she here? She demanded of Gera, not bothering to address Freyja directly. My apprentice goes where I go, Gera said simply, echoing her earlier words to Torstein. Freyja, the honeyed pine tincture in my bag, if you please. Freyja set down Gera's walking stick and opened the leather medicine bag, finding the small jar of amber liquid without difficulty. As she handed it to Gera, little Ingrid looked up from her mother's shoulder, eyes widening at the sight of Freyja's arm. What happened to your arm, lady? The child asked between coughs, with the directness only the very young could manage. Ingrid, don't be rude, Sigrid admonished, though her own behavior had been far ruder. It's all right, Freyja said gently, meeting the child's curious gaze. I fell when I was not much older than you are now. The bone broke and didn't heal quite. Right. Does it hurt? Sometimes when it rains or snows. But mostly I forget about it. I've learned to do things my own way. The little girl coughed again, then asked, Can you still braid hair? Mother says my nurse is useless at braids. Despite herself, Freyja smiled. Yes, I can still braid hair. In fact, my grandmother taught me 12 different braid patterns for different occasions. 12? Ingrid's eyes widened with interest. That's enough questions, Sigrid interrupted. Gera, the medicine? Gera uncorked the jar. 3 drops in warm goat's milk, morning and night, and get her out of this smoky hall for at least an hour each day, properly bundled, of course. Let her play with the other children in the fresh air. Sigrid took the jar reluctantly. And if that doesn't work? Then we try something stronger. Freyja, what would you recommend if the honeyed pine fails to clear the child's lungs? Freyja thought carefully, aware of Bjorn and Sigrid's scrutiny. A steam tent with thyme and sage, or a poultice of mustard seed and honey on the chest. But not too strong for one so young, and test a small area of skin first to ensure she doesn't redden too quickly. Gera nodded approvingly. Good. The same remedies I would suggest. Sigrid looked between them, clearly displeased that Freyja had answered correctly. We'll try the tincture first, she said curtly. Bjorn, see Gera compensated for her service. It was a dismissal, but Gera didn't move. There is another matter we must discuss, Jarl Bjorn, she said, turning to address him directly. Winter approaches, and my supplies are low. I need permission to gather herbs from the southern forest before the snows come. Bjorn frowned. The southern forest? There have been reports of strangers in that area. It's not safe. Nevertheless, certain plants grow only there, and I cannot treat your people without them, Gera insisted. I am too old to gather alone, and Freyja does not yet know the local woods. I will need an escort. Bjorn's gaze shifted to Freyja, assessing. How urgent is this gathering? Without fresh supplies, I cannot promise to treat winter fevers, chest ailments, or infected wounds, Gera replied bluntly. Make your choice, Jarl. Risk a few warriors for a day, or risk your entire settlement when illness strikes. After a moment's consideration, Bjorn nodded. Very well, I'll assign 2 men to accompany you tomorrow, but you will stay on the main paths and return by midday. 3 men, Gera countered, and we need a full day. The plants we seek don't grow conveniently near the pathways. Bjorn's jaw tightened, but he conceded with a curt nod. 3 men. From dawn until dusk, no later. I'll inform Torstein to make arrangements. As they left the great hall, Freyja glanced at Gera. You didn't mention gathering herbs yesterday. The old woman's eyes twinkled with unexpected mischief. Because yesterday, I hadn't yet decided to keep you. Now I need to know if you can identify local plants. Not just the dried ones in my stores. Besides, she added more soberly, you need to be seen contributing to the settlement if you're to have any hope of acceptance here. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of visitors to Gera's hut, a fisherman with an infected hook wound, a young mother worried about her infant's rash, an old man seeking something for his aching joints. Each time, Gera had Freyja assist, watching closely as she cleaned wounds, mixed salves, or explained treatments. By evening, Freyja's injured arm ached from the unaccustomed work, but she felt more purposeful than she had in months. As they ate their evening meal of fish stew and barley bread, Gera studied her new apprentice. You handled yourself well. Today, knowledge is one thing, but manner with patience is another. You have both. Thank you, Freyja said, surprised by the compliment. My grandmother always said a healer's presence should calm as much as her medicines. A wise woman. Gera set down her wooden spoon. Now tell me the real reason you were cast out from your clan. The theft accusation is clearly false. You have healer's hands, not a thief's. Freyja stiffened, then sighed, setting down her own bowl. The old woman was too perceptive to deceive, and after the day's work together, Freyja felt she owed her the truth. The chieftain's son wanted me as a concubine, not a wife, she said quietly. When I refused him, he claimed I had stolen a ceremonial knife from the ritual house. No one would believe my word against his, especially with my— She gestured to her arm. They saw my refusal as arrogance. Who was I with my broken arm to reject a healthy warrior's attention? The punishment for theft was exile, so I was cast out with nothing but the clothes I wore. Gera nodded slowly. And Ragnar? How did you come to correspond with him? A traveling merchant who had witnessed my shaming carried word to other settlements. Ragnar sent a message with the next trader, that he had heard of a healer unjustly accused, and that his settlement needed healing hands. He asked if I would consider corresponding with him. Freyja smiled faintly at the memory. His message included a packet of rare healing herbs as a gift. It was thoughtful. Ragnar was always thoughtful, Gera agreed, a shadow passing over her face. Unlike his siblings, he valued more than just strength of arm. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Gera called for the visitor to enter, and Thorstein stepped inside, bringing with him a whirl of snowflakes, the first of the season. Men are set for tomorrow's gathering expedition, he reported. Myself, Arna, and young Leif will accompany you to the southern forest. His gaze shifted to Freyja. I thought you should know. There's been a sighting. Freyja's heart jumped. A sighting? A fishing boat reported a damaged ship making its way along the northern coastline. It might be nothing, but it might be Ragnar's ship, Freyja finished, hardly daring to hope. Thorstein nodded. Bjorn has sent 2 fast ships to investigate. We should know more in a day or two. After he left, Freyja found herself unable to sit still, pacing the small confines of the hut, while Gera watched her with knowing eyes. Don't pin too much hope on rumors, girl, the old healer cautioned. The sea gives up its dead rarely, and often only to take more in their place. I know, Freyja acknowledged, but if there's even a chance, then we wait and see, Gera said firmly. In the meantime, we have work tomorrow. You should rest that arm and get some sleep. Later, as she lay on her pallet of furs, Freyja stared up at the smoke hole, through which she could see a patch of star-filled sky. The first snow continued to fall, delicate flakes drifting down through the opening to vanish in the warm air above her. Somewhere out in the darkness, a ship might be struggling homeward, carrying the man whose letters had given her hope when all seemed lost. Or it might be strangers, or nothing at all. Freyja touched the wooden pendant she still wore, Ragnar's gift, sent with his proposal. Carved into its surface was Iwaz, the rune of the yew tree, representing endurance and reliability. She had chosen to believe in those qualities when she accepted his proposal. Now, stranded in a hostile settlement with only an old healer's grudging protection, she would need to embody them herself. Snow continued to fall as Freyja finally drifted into sleep, unaware that far to the north, a council was taking place that would change the course of Ravnfjord forever. In a firelit hall overlooking a different fjord, men gathered around a great table, their faces grim as they listened to the words of a warrior whose scarred face and missing eye spoke of battles survived at great cost. "It is decided then," said the one-eyed man, his remaining eye reflecting the firelight. "With the winter, we move south. Ravnfjord's defenses are weakened with their warriors lost at sea. Their stores will see us through until spring." Around him, warriors nodded their agreement, unaware that their plans would soon collide with the fate of a woman deemed too weak to be worthy of their notice. For sometimes, the greatest strength lies not in the arm that wields the sword, but in the mind that sees what others cannot. And in Ravnfjord, such strength would soon be tested as never before. The forest loomed before them, a dense wall of pine and fir draped in the previous night's snow. Freyja's breath formed clouds in the frigid morning air as she adjusted the leather satchel slung across her body. Beside her, Gera pointed out their route to Thorstein, who listened with barely concealed impatience. "We need to reach the southern ravine before midday," the old healer explained. "The moss we seek grows beneath the overhangs, protected from the direct snowfall." Thorstein nodded curtly. "We follow your lead, but remember the Jarl's orders. No unnecessary risks, and back to the settlement by dusk." He gestured to his companions, Arna, a weathered veteran with a graying beard, and Leif, a youth barely old enough to carry a sword but eager to prove himself. The small party set off into the forest, their boots crunching through the fresh powder. Gera walked slowly but purposefully, using her staff to steady herself on the uneven ground. Freyja stayed close to the old woman's side, alert for any signs of fatigue. Behind them, their 3 escorts maintained a vigilant watch, hands never far from their weapons. "The forest is unusually quiet," Arna observed after they had traveled for almost an hour. "No birds, no game tracks." "The snow fell heavily last night," Thorstein replied, though Freyja noticed his eyes scanning the tree line more intently. "The animals are likely sheltering." Gera stopped abruptly, kneeling with difficulty to examine something at the base of a large fir tree. "Freyja, come see. What do you make of this?" Freyja knelt beside her, finding a cluster of small brown mushrooms partially covered by snow. She studied them carefully before answering. "Pine spikes, good for treating lung ailments when dried, and mixed with honey." She glanced at Gera for confirmation. The old healer nodded approvingly. "Gather them. They'll be useful for Sigurd's child if the honeyed pine tincture fails." As Freyja collected the mushrooms, carefully placing them in a small clay pot from her satchel, she became aware of Leif watching her with undisguised curiosity. Unlike many in the settlement, his gaze held no hostility, merely interest. "Is it true you can read and write the runes?" he asked when she straightened. "Yes," Freyja replied, surprised by the question. "My grandmother taught me. She believed healing required knowledge of more than just herbs and techniques. Most women in our settlement know only the basic symbols for protection and fertility," Leif said. "Even among the men, few can truly read the old writings. The eastern settlements value such knowledge more highly," Freyja explained, resuming their walk alongside Gera. "Or at least my grandmother did." Thorstein, who had been listening, gave a derisive snort. "Words scratched on stone or bark won't defend your home or fill your belly. Steel and strength are what matter in this world." "Is that why you follow Bjorn so loyally?" Gera asked, her tone pointed. "For his steel and strength?" A tense silence fell over the group. Freyja glanced between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't yet understand. Finally, Thorstein answered, his voice low. "I follow Bjorn because he is Jarl, as did Ragnar until he disagreed once too often," Gera finished. Let us not pretend their quarrels were simple matters of loyalty. Before Thorstein could respond, Arna raised his hand sharply, signaling for silence. He pointed ahead to a break in the trees, where the land sloped down into the ravine they sought. But instead of continuing forward, he gestured for them to retreat, into the cover of denser forest. "Tracks," he whispered once they were concealed. "Too many for a hunting party, too deliberate for wild animals." "Raiders?" Leif asked, his eyes wide. "Or traitors lost in the storm," Thorstein countered, though his hand moved to the axe at his belt. "Stay here with the women. Arna and I will scout ahead." As the two men disappeared into the trees, Freyja turned to Geira, who looked unsurprised by this development. "You expected this," she accused quietly. "You knew there might be strangers in these woods." The old healer met her gaze steadily. "I suspected. Bjorn mentioned reports yesterday, if you recall. Yet you insisted we come anyway. Why?" Geira's weathered face revealed nothing. "Because we genuinely need the herbs, girl. And because sometimes one must go toward danger to understand it, rather than hiding behind walls and waiting for it to find you." Before Freyja could press further, Leif shifted nervously beside them. "If there are raiders in these woods, we should return to the settlement immediately. The Jarl must be warned." "And abandon Thorstein and Arna?" Freyja asked. The young warrior looked torn. "My orders were to protect you and Geira. If there's danger—" "Peace, boy," Geira said, placing a gnarled hand on his arm. "Let us wait for their return before deciding our course. Raiders don't typically venture so close to settlements in winter unless they're desperate or have specific knowledge of vulnerable targets." Leif's expression darkened. "Like a settlement missing a third of its warriors after a failed raid?" The implication hung heavily in the cold air. Freyja recalled the whispers she'd heard since arriving. Ragnar's raid had taken 10 capable fighters, none of whom had returned. Ravnfjord's defenses were indeed weakened, a fact that would not go unnoticed by opportunistic neighbors. The snap of a branch sent Leif spinning around, sword half drawn, but it was only Thorstein returning alone. His expression was grim as he approached. "We need to leave. Now." His voice was barely above a whisper. "What did you find?" Geira demanded. "A camp, recently abandoned. At least 15 men, judging by the sleeping areas. They left in haste, heading south, toward Ravnfjord." Freyja's blood ran cold. "Raiders?" Thorstein nodded curtly. "Arne is tracking them, but we must warn the settlement. They have perhaps a half-day's lead on us." "What about our herbs?" Geira protested, though without much conviction. Even she recognized the gravity of the threat. "Your plants will have to wait," Thorstein snapped. "Leif, take Geira back along the path we came. Move as quickly as she can manage. I'll escort Freyja on a more direct route through the western ridge. We can reach Ravnfjord faster and raise the alarm." Geira frowned. "Splitting up is unwise. So is wasting time," Thorstein countered. "The girl is younger and can move faster. With me than you can. No disrespect intended, Geira, but Ravnfjord's safety depends on swift warning." After a moment's hesitation, the old healer nodded. "Very well. But take care on the western path. The snow will have hidden many hazards." As they prepared to separate, Geira pulled Freyja aside. "Keep your wits about you, girl, and remember, not all dangers come from outside our walls." The cryptic warning left Freyja unsettled as she followed Thorstein into the denser part of the forest, away from the established path. The warrior moved with surprising stealth for his size, choosing their route carefully to minimize noise and visible tracks. Freyja matched his pace as best she could, grateful for the hours spent gathering herbs on the rocky cliffs of her homeland. Her injured arm ached in the cold, but she ignored it, focusing instead on the urgency of their mission. They had been traveling for perhaps an hour when Thorstein suddenly halted, raising a hand for silence. Freyja froze, straining to hear what had alerted him. For several heartbeats, There was nothing but the soft whisper of wind through pine needles. Then she heard it. Voices, carried faintly on the breeze. Thorstein pulled her down into a crouch behind a fallen log. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't move until I return." Before she could protest, he had slipped away through the underbrush, moving as silently as a shadow. Freyja pressed herself against the rough bark of the log, heart pounding. She was no warrior, had no weapon save a small herb knife, and her injured arm made her vulnerable in any physical confrontation. If raiders found her here alone? A rustling sound to her left sent panic shooting through her veins. Someone was approaching, and not with Thorstein's careful stealth. Freyja looked desperately for a better hiding place, but moving would only draw attention. Instead, she pulled her gray cloak tighter around her, trying to blend with the snow-dusted log and underbrush. The footsteps drew closer, then stopped. Freyja held her breath, not daring to turn her head to look. Long seconds passed, the silence more terrifying than any sound. Then a voice spoke, so close she nearly cried out in shock. "I know you're there," said a man, his tone surprisingly gentle despite the threat implicit in his words. "I mean you no harm, but I need information." Slowly, Freyja turned her head. Standing a few paces away was a tall man unlike any she had seen before. His dark hair was pulled back in a complex braid interwoven with silver beads. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, crossing an eye patch that concealed what must have been a grievous wound. His clothing was finer than most raiders, with intricate patterns embroidered along the edges of his cloak, though travel-worn and stained. Most striking, however, was the silver circlet partially visible beneath his hood, a mark of nobility that no common raider would wear, much less into the wilderness. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice steadier than she expected. "Someone seeking answers," he replied, making no move to approach closer. "You're from Ravenfjord?" Freyja hesitated, unsure whether to claim the settlement as her own. "I'm gathering herbs for the healer there." "Alone? In these woods?" Skepticism colored his tone. "I was with escorts," she admitted. "One went to scout ahead." The stranger nodded thoughtfully. "The large man with the red beard? He's currently surrounded by 4 of my men. I suggest we avoid unnecessary bloodshed." Fear clutched at Freyja's heart. Thorstein was captured, and now her as well. But something about this man's manner confused her. He spoke not as a raider planning violence, but as someone conducting a deliberate inquiry. "What do you want with Ravenfjord?" she asked directly. The man studied her for a moment, his single eye revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Information, primarily. The settlement's current strength, its leadership, its defenses." "You plan to attack," Freyja stated. "That depends on what I learn." He gestured for her to stand. "Come. My men won't harm your escort if you cooperate." Seeing little choice, Freyja rose, keeping her injured arm partially concealed beneath her cloak. She followed the stranger through the trees to a small clearing where, as promised, Thorstein knelt surrounded by 4 armed men. His hands were bound before him, but he appeared unharmed, though his expression darkened with fury when he saw Freyja. "You should have run," he growled. "To where?" she countered. "I don't know these woods." The one-eyed man watched this exchange with interest. "You're not from Ravenfjord," he observed. "Your accent is Eastern." "She arrived recently," Thorstein interjected before Freyja could respond. "She knows nothing of value to you, Halfdan. Let her go." Freyja's eyes widened at the name. Halfdan. She had heard it whispered in Ravenfjord, always with a mixture of fear and contempt. Halfdan the exiled, son of King Harald of the Northern Isles, cast out by his father and rumored to lead a band of mercenaries and outcasts. "You know me," Halfdan said to Thorstein, seemingly unsurprised. "Yet I don't recall making your acquaintance." "Every warrior in the region knows of Halfdan One-Eye," Thorstein replied bitterly. The king's son who turned his back on his people. Something dangerous flashed across Halfdan's face, but his voice remained calm. An interesting interpretation of events. But we're not here to discuss my family history. He turned to one of his men. Take them to the camp, gently. They are not to be harmed. As they were led through the forest, Freyja's mind raced. If Halfdan planned to attack Ravnfjord, the settlement needed warning. But even if she somehow escaped these warriors, she had no idea how to find her way back. Her best hope lay in somehow convincing Halfdan that attacking Ravnfjord would be unwise. But how? The camp proved to be a series of low temporary shelters nestled against a rocky hillside, cleverly positioned to be invisible from most approaches. About a dozen men moved efficiently around the site, all armed but displaying none of the chaotic energy Freyja would have expected from raiders. These were disciplined warriors, and all the more dangerous for it. Thorstein was taken to a separate shelter, while Freyja was brought to a larger one near the center of the camp. Inside, a small fire burned, surrounded by furs and several wooden chests. Halfdan entered behind her, removing his heavy cloak and hanging it on a peg driven into one of the support poles. Sit, he invited, indicating a pile of furs opposite the fire. When she complied, he settled across from her, studying her with unsettling intensity. Now, tell me about Ravnfjord's current situation. Why should I tell you anything? Freyja countered. You plan to raid the settlement, do I? Halfdan raised an eyebrow. You seem very certain of my intentions. Why else would you need information about Ravnfjord's defenses? A hint of a smile touched Halfdan's scarred face. Perhaps I merely wish to pass by unmolested. Or perhaps I have other business there that requires planning. What business could the exiled son of King Harald possibly have in Ravnfjord? You know who I am, he observed. Yet you're not from the settlement. Interesting. Freyja realized her mistake too late. She had revealed knowledge she shouldn't possess as a newcomer unless she had been told specifically about Halfdan. She tried to recover. People talk. Your name has been mentioned. I'm sure it has. Halfdan agreed, his tone suddenly weary. Rarely favorably, I imagine. Before Freyja could respond, the tent flap opened and a warrior entered. He bowed slightly to Halfdan, then spoke in a low voice. The scouts have returned. The settlement prepares for a feast tonight. Their guard is minimal, focused mainly on the harbor. Halfdan nodded. And the approach from the eastern ridge? Unguarded, as expected. Good, we move at dusk. He dismissed, the man with a gesture, then turned back to Freyja, who had gone pale. You are going to attack, she whispered. I am going to reclaim what's mine, Halfdan corrected. With minimal bloodshed, if possible. These are innocent people. Are they? His single eye fixed on her with sudden intensity. You've been in Ravnfjord how long? A few days? A week? Do you know who leads them? Do you know what Bjorn Haraldson did to secure his position as Jarl? Freyja hesitated, recalling Geira's cryptic warnings and the tension whenever Bjorn's leadership was discussed. I know there were disagreements between him and his brother. Halfdan laughed, a sharp sound without humor. Disagreements? Is that what they're calling it now? He leaned forward, firelight throwing his scarred face into sharp relief. Bjorn murdered his own father, blamed it on raiders, then exiled or eliminated anyone who questioned his version of events, including his own brother, Ragnar, who was fortunate enough to be away when Bjorn seized power. The mention of Ragnar's name sent a jolt through Freyja. Ragnar is alive! Something in her tone made Halfdan study her more carefully. Possibly. His ship was seen headed north after the storm that supposedly claimed him. Why? What is Ragnar Haraldson to you? Freyja's mind whirled with implications. If Ragnar lived, if he had escaped rather than drowned, But why had he not returned to Ravensfjord? And how did Halfdan know these details? I was to marry him, she admitted finally. We corresponded for months. He invited me to Ravensfjord, but when I arrived, they told me he had been lost at sea with his raiding party. Understanding dawned in Halfdan's eye. You're the healer from the eastern settlements, the one with the injured arm. Freyja instinctively clutched her right arm to her body, defensive. How do you know about me? Ragnar mentioned you in his message, Halfdan said, when he sought sanctuary in the northern isles after escaping Bjorn's ambush at sea. Ambush, Freyja echoed, struggling to make sense of these revelations. The raid was a ruse, Halfdan explained, his voice hardening. Bjorn sent Ragnar and his most loyal men on a false mission, then arranged for them to be attacked at sea by hired mercenaries. He believed all had perished until rumors reached him that some survivors had made land far to the north. Where my father's kingdom could offer protection, he continued. Ragnar and I were friends in our youth, before my disagreements with my father resulted in my exile. When he learned I led my own band nearby, he sent word, asking me to verify his suspicions about Bjorn and, if possible, to ensure your safety once you arrived. Freyja stared at him, pieces falling into place. You're not here to raid Ravensfjord. You're here to remove Bjorn. Halfdan inclined his head slightly. At Ragnar's request, and because Bjorn's ambitions have begun to threaten settlements under my protection, the Jarl has been making alliances with other power-hungry chieftains, planning expansions come spring. His expression darkened. Tonight, while the settlement celebrates the winter feast, I intend to enter the Great Hall and challenge Bjorn directly. My quarrel is with him, not his people. And if he refuses to face you? Then matters become more complicated, Halfdan admitted. But I have men positioned to ensure minimal harm to the innocent, Freyja thought quickly. If what Halfdan said was true, and something in her heart believed it was, then Bjorn had not only usurped leadership, but had attempted to murder his own brother and lied to the entire settlement. Yet openly supporting Halfdan meant putting her trust in a stranger known as an exile and mercenary leader. If you speak truth, she said carefully, then you should let Torstein and me return to warn Gyra and others who might be caught in any fighting. And risk Bjorn being forewarned? I think not. Halfdan shook his head. You will remain here until our business at Ravensfjord is concluded. Then take me with you, Freyja urged, surprising herself with her boldness. If Ragnar asked you to ensure my safety, surely that's best accomplished by keeping me at your side rather than leaving me in the forest with guards who might abandon their post if fighting breaks out. Halfdan studied her, clearly weighing the request. You think quickly for a healer, he observed, but taking you into potential danger hardly seems like ensuring your safety. I can tend any wounded, she countered, and my presence might help. Convince others that your quarrel is truly only with Bjorn, not the settlement itself. For a long moment, Halfdan considered her words. Finally, he nodded. Very well. You will accompany us, but you will stay behind me at all times and follow every instruction without question. Is that understood? Freyja nodded, relief mingling with apprehension. She had secured a place in Halfdan's approaching confrontation, but what role she would ultimately play remained uncertain. Would she witness justice being served, or merely exchange one dangerous situation for another? As darkness fell and Halfdan's men prepared for their advance on Ravensfjord, Freyja sent a silent prayer to the gods. Somewhere to the north, Ragnar Haraldson lived, the man whose letters had brought her across the sea, whose apparent death had left her stranded among hostile strangers. Now she found herself aligning with his friend against his brother, stepping into a bloody family feud with only her wits and healing skills for protection. The settlement's winter feast would soon begin, unaware that fate approached from the shadows. And as Freyja donned the heavier cloak Halfdan had provided against the deepening cold, she couldn't help but wonder if, by nightfall, she would be standing in the presence of a new Jarl, or witnessing the fall of Ravnfjord itself. Darkness cloaked the forest as Freyja followed Halfdan and his warriors toward Ravnfjord. Frost crunched beneath their boots, the bitter cold seeping through her layers despite the heavy cloak she'd been given. The moon hung low and full, casting silver light across the snow-covered landscape and transforming familiar terrain into something otherworldly. They moved in silence, each warrior knowing his role. Halfdan led the main group, with smaller contingents, breaking off at his subtle hand signals to circle the settlement from different approaches. Freyja stayed close behind him as instructed, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might betray their position. As they crested the final ridge overlooking Ravnfjord, the settlement came into view below. Warm light spilled from the great hall, where the winter feast would be well underway. Smaller dwellings dotted the slope leading down to the harbor, most dark as their inhabitants had joined the celebration. Only a handful of guards patrolled the perimeter, their attention focused primarily toward the sea, the direction from which raiders traditionally approached. "They expect no threat from the forest," Halfdan murmured, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Bjorn's arrogance makes him predictable." Freyja studied the settlement layout. "The great hall has a rear entrance," she whispered. "Through the storage rooms. Fewer guards." Halfdan glanced at her with newfound appreciation. "You learn quickly for a recent arrival. A healer must know how to reach the hall in emergencies, without disrupting feasts or councils through the main doors," she explained. "Gira showed me." He nodded thoughtfully. "That may prove useful. Can you lead us there?" "Yes, but..." She hesitated, troubled by her own willingness to help. Was she betraying the people of Ravnfjord, or helping to liberate them from a murderous leader? "What exactly do you intend once inside?" "As I told you, I will challenge Bjorn directly. If he accepts, the matter will be settled between us alone. If not..." His hand moved to the sword at his hip, the gesture speaking more clearly than words. "And your men?" "Will secure the hall to prevent interference, but harm no one who doesn't raise a weapon against them." His single eye met hers, intense and unwavering. "This is justice, not conquest." Freyja weighed his words, searching for deception and finding none. Finally, she nodded. "The rear entrance leads through storerooms, then the brewing area. From there, a narrow corridor connects to the back of the great hall, behind the high table." "Perfect." Halfdan turned to his lieutenant, a broad-shouldered man with a scarred face. "Gunner, take 6 men and approach from the harbor. Draw the guards' attention but do not engage unless necessary. Svein, your group will secure the main entrance once we're inside. The rest follow me." With practiced efficiency, the warriors dispersed to their assigned positions. Halfdan beckoned Freyja forward. "Lead us, healer." The descent to the settlement edge was treacherous in the darkness, but they moved like shadows, avoiding the patches of moonlight that would reveal their presence. As they reached the cluster of buildings at the settlement's edge, Freyja could hear the distant sounds of revelry from the great hall. Singing, laughter, the pounding rhythm of drums marking a celebration in full swing. Skirting the outermost dwellings, Freyja led Halfdan and his men toward the rear of the great hall. They paused in the shadow of a storage shed as a guard wandered past, his attention clearly more focused on the warmth and festivities he was missing than on potential threats. Once he had passed, they continued on, reaching the back entrance, without incident. The heavy wooden door was barred from within, but one of Halfdan's men produced tools from his belt and worked the mechanism with practiced ease. The door swung open silently, revealing stacks of barrels and storage containers in the dimly lit space beyond. "Wait," Freyja whispered as the warriors prepared to enter. "Let me go first. If anyone is here, they'll be less alarmed by a woman. They recognize than armed strangers." Halfdan hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful." Freyja slipped through the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The storeroom was empty of people. though well stocked with winter provisions. She moved carefully between the barrels of preserved fish and sacks of grain, reaching the door that led to the brewing area beyond. Pressing her ear against it, she heard the low murmur of voices. Someone was there. She glanced back at Halfdan, who had followed silently and now stood just behind her. She held up 2 fingers, indicating the number of people. He nodded in understanding. Taking a deep breath, Freyja pushed open the door and stepped through with as much confidence as she could muster. 2 young men looked up in surprise from where they were filling pitchers with mead from a large vat. She recognized them as servants who helped Astrid manage the household. "Freyja?" one asked, confusion clear in his voice. "What are you doing here? Weren't you with Gera in the forest?" "We returned early," she replied, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "Gera sent me to fetch her special medicine bag. She left it in her sleeping alcove." The young men exchanged glances. "The feast is well underway. The Jarl wouldn't want interruptions." "It's for Ingrid," Freyja improvised, mentioning Sigurd's sickly daughter. "Her cough has worsened. You know how the Jarl's sister gets when her child is ill." That seemed to convince them. The older servant nodded toward the inner door. "Be quick about it, and use the servants' passage. The Jarl has important guests tonight, some traders from the southern fjords with valuable furs." "Thank you," Freyja said, her guilt mounting as she moved past them toward the inner door. As soon as she was through, Halfdan and 3 of his men slipped in behind her, moving with such silent efficiency that the servants had no chance to raise an alarm. They were quickly bound and gagged, though not harmed. The corridor beyond was narrow and dark, lit only by the occasional wall sconce. It ran the length of the great hall, with smaller passages branching off to sleeping quarters and storage areas. At the far end, ornately carved doors would open, directly behind the high table where Bjorn would be seated. As they crept along the passage, the sounds of the feast grew louder. Boisterous laughter, the clatter of drinking horns, and the rhythmic pounding of fists on tables as someone performed. A saga. Freyja's steps slowed as they approached the final door, her courage faltering. "Second thoughts?" Halfdan's voice was barely audible beside her ear. "If you're wrong about Bjorn, if this is merely a power grab, many innocent people could die tonight," she whispered back. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Freyja turned, meeting his gaze in the dim light. His face was solemn, the scar that crossed his eye patch stark against his skin. "I swear to you by all I hold sacred, Bjorn Haraldson murdered. His father attempted to murder his brother, and will bring ruin to this settlement through his ambitions. I seek justice, not conquest." Something in his intensity convinced her. She nodded once, then pointed to the carved door. "Through there. The high table will be directly ahead." Halfdan signaled to his men, who positioned themselves on either side of the door. Then he looked at Freyja. "Stay behind me. Whatever happens next, do not place yourself in danger." She nodded, though they both knew such promises were easily broken in the chaos of conflict. Halfdan drew his sword, a magnificent weapon with runes etched along its blade, and with one powerful kick, threw open the doors. The sudden intrusion brought an immediate halt to the revelry. Hundreds of faces turned toward the back of the hall, expressions shifting from surprise to confusion to fear as armed warriors poured in behind Halfdan. At the high table, Bjorn rose to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword that wasn't there. Weapons were traditionally left at the door during feasts. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, voice carrying across the suddenly silent hall. Halfdan stepped forward, his rune-marked sword gleaming in the firelight. "Bjorn Haraldson, I come seeking justice for crimes committed against your family and people." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many recognized the intruder, and the name Halfdan One-Eye passed from lip to lip like wildfire. Bjorn's face darkened with fury. "Guards!" he shouted. but the few warriors present found themselves already surrounded by Halfdan's men, who had secured the hall's entrances with swift efficiency. "Your brother Ragnar sends his greetings," Halfdan continued, advancing toward the high table. "He was most displeased to learn of your attempt to have him killed at sea." A collective gasp swept through the hall. Freyja, still partially concealed in the corridor entrance, searched the crowd for familiar faces. She spotted Sigrid, her face pale with shock, clutching little Ingrid to her side. Nearby sat Astrid, the old matriarch, whose expression showed not surprise but a grim confirmation, as though she had long suspected such a confrontation would come. "Ragnar is dead," Bjorn declared, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Lost in a storm with his raiding party." "Is that what you told your people?" Halfdan asked, loud enough for all to hear. "That the storm claimed him? Not the mercenaries you hired to ambush his ship? Not the same men who helped you murder Jarl Harald, your own father?" The accusations hung in the air like physical blows. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, faces turning toward Bjorn with new suspicion. "These are lies!" Bjorn roared. "This man is an exiled criminal who seeks to sow discord for his own gain." "Then, face me in honorable combat," Halfdan challenged. "If your cause is just, the gods will favor your blade." For a moment, the hall held its breath. Then Bjorn laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "I need not prove myself against the bastard son of a king who couldn't even keep his crown. Guards, kill this intruder." But the guards hesitated, caught between their oath to the Jarl and the ancient laws of combat challenge. In that moment of uncertainty, another voice rang out, strong, feminine, commanding attention. "Let him speak." Astrid stood, her aged frame somehow imposing as she stared down her son. "If Halfdan Haraldson brings news of my younger son Ragnar, we will hear it." "Mother, don't be fooled by—" Bjorn began, but Astrid cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Enough, Bjorn. Too long have I remained silent out of fear for what remains of our family." She turned to address the hall. "My husband died not from raiders, but from poison. I suspected, but could not prove it. When Ragnar began asking questions, he too became a target." Stunned silence gripped the hall. Astrid continued, her voice gaining strength. "Halfdan was fostered in our hall as a youth, friend to both my sons before his exile. If he says Ragnar lives, I believe him." All eyes turned back to Halfdan, who inclined his head respectfully to the old woman. "Ragnar Haraldson shelters under my father's protection in the Northern Isles, recovering from wounds sustained when he fought free of Bjorn's assassins." "This is treachery," Bjorn shouted, desperation entering his voice as he saw control slipping away. With surprising speed, he lunged across the table, seizing a serving knife and grabbing the nearest person to him, Sigrid, his own sister. The hall erupted in chaos. Women screamed, men shouted, but Halfdan remained eerily calm, his sword unwavering. "Release her, Bjorn. You've lost." "Back away or she dies," Bjorn snarled, pressing the knife to Sigrid's throat. "Clear a path to the door. I'll release her once I'm safely away." Freyja watched in horror as little Ingrid, separated from her mother in the chaos, began to cry. The child's distress triggered a coughing fit, the same respiratory ailment they had treated earlier. The sound drew Bjorn's attention momentarily, just enough distraction for Sigrid to drive her elbow hard into his ribs. He stumbled back, but recovered quickly, lunging toward his sister with the knife. In the split second before the blade could find its mark, another figure darted forward from the shadows of the corridor, Freyja moving with unexpected speed. Her smaller form slipped past Halfdan, and though her injured arm lacked strength, her aim was true as she flung her healer's knife with precision. The small blade embedded itself in Bjorn's forearm, causing him to drop the serving knife with a howl of pain. Before he could recover, Halfdan closed the distance between them, the point of his ruined sword pressing against Bjorn's throat. "Yield," Halfdan commanded, or meet your ancestors with the shame of your crimes following you to the afterlife. Cornered and exposed, Bjorn glared with hatred at the one-eyed warrior, then at Freyja, who stood nearby, her face pale but resolute. "You?" he spat. "The cripple my brother thought to bring here. Too weak to be a proper wife, yet you dare interfere?" "Weak?" Halfdan repeated, his voice carrying across the now silent hall. "This woman just saved your sister's life while you cowered behind a woman's skirts. I see no weakness there, only the strength that comes from courage and conviction." Bjorn's gaze darted around the hall, searching for supporters and finding none. Even his most loyal warriors stood down, unwilling to defend a man who would threaten his own sister. With a final, venomous glare, he dropped to his knees. "I yield," he growled through clenched teeth. The tension in the hall broke. Halfdan's men secured Bjorn, binding his hands as Sigrid rushed to gather her frightened daughter. Astrid approached Halfdan, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My son? Ragnar truly lives?" "He does," Halfdan confirmed, "wounded but recovering. He sends this as proof of his survival." He reached within his tunic and withdrew a small wooden pendant, an exact match to the one Freyja wore, carved with the rune Iwaz. Astrid's hand trembled as she took it. "When will he return?" "With the spring thaw, if his strength allows. Until then, Ravnfjord will need leadership." Halfdan turned to address the hall at large. "I did not come to claim this settlement, but to bring justice. By right of combat, Bjorn is stripped of his title. Until Ragnar returns, I suggest Astrid Haraldsdottir serve as acting jarl, with a council of your most trusted to assist her." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Astrid had always been respected, and many had privately questioned Bjorn's leadership. The revelation of his crimes turned uncertainty to conviction. As the immediate crisis subsided, and the hall reorganized itself, Freyja found herself the subject of curious stares and whispered conversations. The woman deemed too weak to marry a warrior had just helped overthrow a jarl. She retreated to a quiet corner, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had transpired. "You have my gratitude," said a voice beside her. Sigrid stood there, holding Ingrid, her proud demeanor replaced by genuine humility. "For my daughter's sake, if not my own." Freyja nodded, unsure how to respond to this sudden change in attitude. "Is she all right? The excitement may have worsened her cough." "She will be, thanks to your medicine." Sigrid hesitated, then added, "Perhaps I judged too quickly, seeing only what you could not do, rather than what you could." Before Freyja could respond, Halfdan approached, his commanding presence drawing all eyes. "The settlement is secure. Bjorn will be held until Ragnar can decide his fate." He turned to Freyja, his expression softening. "You disregarded my instruction to stay behind me." "Your instruction was unreasonable," she replied simply. "I saw an opportunity and took it." A rare smile touched his scarred face. "So you did. Ragnar chose well when he sought a match with you." "If he lives, why did he not send word directly to me?" Freyja asked, the question that had been burning in her mind. "His injuries were severe. He asked me to assess the situation first, to ensure it was safe before revealing his survival." Halfdan's gaze was apologetic. "I would have approached you differently had I known immediately who you were." In the hours that followed, order was restored to Ravnfjord. Astrid took her place as temporary jarl, with Torstein, released and somewhat chastened, pledging his sword to her service. Halfdan's warriors integrated with the settlement's defenses, strengthening them against potential threats during the vulnerable winter months. Freyja found herself suddenly elevated from tolerated outsider to respected healer. The story of her role in Bjorn's downfall spread quickly, embellished with each telling until one might have thought she single-handedly saved the entire settlement. More significant to her, however, was the knowledge that Ragnar lived, that The man whose letters had given her hope would return come spring. As dawn broke over Ravnfjord, painting the snow-covered landscape in hues of pink and gold, Freyja stood on the shoreline, watching the early light dance across the fjord's dark waters. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind her, and she turned to find Halfdan approaching, his tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. "Your people prepare a ship," he said, coming to stand beside her. "I return to the Northern Isles today to bring news of Ravnfjord's liberation to Ragnar." "Will you tell him everything?" Freyja asked. "Every detail," Halfdan affirmed. "Including how the woman he chose for her healing hands and keen mind proved her strength in ways no one expected." Freyja smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I believe it myself. Yesterday I was gathering mushrooms in the forest. Today people look at me as though I'm some saga heroine." "Perhaps you are," Halfdan suggested. "The best sagas are those where strength comes in unexpected forms." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the sun climb higher above the horizon. Finally, Halfdan spoke again, his tone more personal. "Ragnar asked me to deliver a message, should I find you well in Ravnfjord." He withdrew a small scroll from his cloak, sealed with wax impressed with the Iwa's rune. His own words, written as he recovered. Freyja took the scroll with trembling fingers. "Thank you." Halfdan inclined his head. "He is fortunate to have found someone who sees beyond the surface, as you do. As does he." He paused, studying her face. "When spring comes, and the ice breaks, I will return with Ragnar. Until then, Ravnfjord is in good hands, including yours." As Halfdan turned to leave, Freyja called after him. "What about you? Will you remain exiled from your father's kingdom?" He glanced back, his single eye reflecting the morning light. "Perhaps not. My father grows old, and these events have opened channels of communication long closed. We shall see what spring brings for all of us." Later, alone in what had once been Geira's hut but was now officially recognized as the settlement's healing house, Freyja broke the seal on Ragnar's message. His handwriting was unsteady, evidence of his injuries, but his words were clear and heartfelt. "Freyja Sigurdsdottir. If you are reading this, then Halfdan has found you in Ravnfjord, and my brother's treachery has been revealed. I live, though, barely at first. Each day brings more strength. I grieve that your welcome to Ravnfjord was not as promised. Know that had I been there, you would have been received with the honor and respect you deserve. My family's shame is that they saw your arm and judged your worth by what you could not do, rather than by the countless things you can. I write not to hold you to our arrangement. Circumstances have changed, and you may wish to reconsider a match with a man who returns damaged from battle. But know this, my regard for you has only deepened, and if you are willing, I would still build a life with you in Ravnfjord when spring allows my return. Until then, trust Halfdan as I do, a man who sees true worth beneath the surface, as I hope I do as well." With deepest regard, Ragnar Haraldson Freyja read the letter twice, more, each time finding new meaning in his carefully chosen words. Outside, Ravnfjord continued its transformation, Bjorn's supporters either pledging new loyalty to Astrid or making preparations to leave, Halfdan's warriors integrating with the settlement's defenses, and the people themselves adjusting to the dramatic changes of the past day. Yet amidst all this upheaval, Freyja felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time since her exile from her homeland, she had found a place where she was valued not despite her differences, but in part because of them. The woman they had mocked as too weak to marry a warrior had proven strength came in many forms. In healing hands, in quick thinking, in courage under fire. As winter settled fully over Ravnfjord, Freyja took her place as the settlement's healer, working alongside Geira until the old woman decided to step back, recognizing a worthy successor. Each day brought new challenges and new acceptance, as the people who had once whispered behind her back now sought her wisdom and care. And each day brought spring closer, and with it, the return of a man who had seen her worth from the beginning, even across an ocean. Until then, she would continue proving that true strength resided not merely in the arm that wielded a sword, but in the heart and mind that knew when to use entirely different weapons. If you've enjoyed this epic tale of Viking courage and unexpected
strength, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that transport you to different days and places.
Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next upload, and leave a comment telling us what you thought about Freyja's journey. Remember, true warriors come in many forms, and sometimes the greatest strength is not in how we wield a sword, but in how we face life's battles with the unique gifts we possess.